Okay, we've got one last thing to set up in Photoshop. Again, how they could scatter their preferences over so much space is beyond me, but nonetheless they have. The last things that we need to set up are also under your Edit menu, and I'm fairly certain this is for Windows as well. Click on your Edit menu and come all the way down to Keyboard Shortcuts. And if you open up Keyboard Shortcuts, the only thing that we're going to change in here, you can actually do custom shortcuts for all the stuff in the Photoshop menus. Like you can see here for a new file, you could change the keyboard command shortcut. I don't really recommend doing that. I'm not a huge shortcut person, but I do use some. I will let you know the ones that I use and focus on that. But this, again, I've already told you, I'm not the memory guy. And so for me to do Command Shift Option I tilde to change the way some whatever looks, it's just never going to happen. So at any rate, but in the dialog box that opens, this Use Legacy Undo Shortcuts, I live by this. So what that means is that in the first 30 years of Photoshop, if you did something, so let's say you changed a curve. It just changed how the image looked. If you hit Command Z, it would undo that change. If you hit Command Z again, it would redo that change, and it would just go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. Undo only went back one step. In order to go back multiple steps, you had to add the Option key. So if you held down Control Option Z, it would undo whatever the last move on the curve was, and then if you did it again, it would do the next move back in history, and the next move back in history, and the next move back in history. It didn't do that back and forth thing. They changed that now to be just the opposite. So now, if you want to go back and forth, you do Control Option Z. But it was just maddening for people like me who've been doing this for 30 years. So I prefer it to be the way I do it. But that's really up to you guys in your entirety. And then there's another thing I want to show here. So I'm going to simply say OK to this. And then up in the Edit menu again, down to Toolbar. And in the toolbar down here, they now have customized how the toolbar actually works. So these represent all the tools that are over here on this side. So you can see at the very top, this is the Move tool and the Artboard tool. Well, that's what's together on this little icon up here. You can customize all of this. You can move this stuff around. And after you've moved it all around and you completely confused yourself and you have no idea where the fuck anything is, just come over here and hit Restore Defaults and you'll be back to where you should be. If you're missing something, this is likely what's happened here. Mine get confused at times, especially some of my brushes. So the brushes will actually these guys will get mixed up, and mixer brush will end up not here. I'll just have two of them. If that's the case, this is where you come, and this is what it'll look like. This stuff will be sitting over here, so the mixer brush won't be visible to you. And you simply grab it on this side and drag it over, and you can put it wherever you want it. And you can reorder these. If you always use mixer brush up at the top, you can put it up at the top, that kind of stuff, and then just hit done, and you're good to go on this. Are there questions about any of this? Okay, I need everybody to go to our Canvas site really quickly. And I want you to go to Session 1 Resources. So again, click on the Modules page, or if you're in the home page, you can click on the Session number 1 button. Either way, it'll get you to the same spot. And open up the course Session 1 Resources. And in this Session 1 Resources, what you're looking for under Support is Photoshop Preference Locations. So if you click on this, it will actually open up, it takes you actually to Adobe's help site. And what we are looking in here is we want to get to the general preferences for Photoshop to save them so that we don't have to do this madness again. So if you've got the very top panel is Mac OS locations. If you're on Windows, keep scrolling down and you'll get to the Windows version of this as well, and it will tell you exactly where they are. So I'm going to show the Macintosh people how to get theirs because Apple has made this very difficult to find. So the location for this file that we're looking for, it's an Adobe Photoshop file. It will have a version number in it with this pref.psp. It's located inside your user library, which is what is hard to find, in the preference folder in the Adobe settings. This is the folder that we're actually looking for. So to get to it, come back out to your Finder. In your Finder, if you click on the Go menu and get a drop down, you'll see that it's got recent documents, blah, blah, blah. It's got all of this stuff in here. What it does not have in here is library. You are looking for your user library. To get that, I'm going to still hold my Go button down. Hold down either the Shift key or the Option key. In my case, it's the Option key, and you'll see the word library shows up. This is normally hidden by Apple. You want to come down and select library, because this is the folder we need to get to. While we're here, if you can, there should be a little folder next to your library. Is there a little folder next to yours? It just says the word library like this. Oh, hover over library and you get the little folder. If you don't want to remember this trick ever again, simply grab that little folder and drag it over into your favorites toolbar and let go. And you will then not have to remember that little trick. All you need to do is click on library. So again, if we go back to where this is in my user library, it is in the library, then it is in preferences. So I'm going to scroll down to preferences. Not preference panes, but preferences, and I'm going to click on that. Then the next folder I'm looking for is Adobe Photoshop, the version that I'm running, which is 2023. So again, we're going to come down to 2023, and it's in the Adobe Photoshop settings. This is where it actually is in here. So I'm going to click on my Adobe Photoshop settings 2023. And this is the file that I'm looking for right here, this Adobe Photoshop 2023 prefs.psp. Grab that file, drag it onto your desktop. Do not let go, because if you let go, you're going to take it out of this folder and put it on your desktop. You want to make a copy. So simply hold down the Option key and you'll see your cursor gives you a plus, and then let go. You now have a copy of that setup preference file on your desktop. It's right here. If ever your preferences go wonky, you simply take this file and you put it back into that folder, replacing the one that went bad. Even better, if you have multiple machines, you don't have to reconfigure every one of your computers to do this. You simply need to drop this file into that same location on all your computers, and you are good to go. You also can work on a computer like this. If they'll let you actually drop a preference file in here. I don't know how much IT has locked these things down, but it'll do the same thing. It'll actually configure all your preferences the way we just had them set up. You don't ever have to do this again. Make sense? Okay. What most people do is they'll keep this on an external hard drive. We're going to do the same thing with a custom workspace, so that you just don't, who wants to be doing this stuff? No one, right? I mean, again, all those things about work smarter and whatever. Okay, back into Photoshop, please. So why do I use this custom workspace right now? Well, everything that I really need, not everything, but the majority, 90% of what I actually need to do in retouching is visible to me. Now, in most of you, if you're working in the default workspace for Photoshop, which we're going to look at in just a second, whatever here, you don't have info, which is critical to what the work that we're doing. You're not able to see channels. You've got to actually, channels are located with your with paths and layers. So you can't see your layers and your channels at the same time. That will cripple you in this class. So we're going to build this custom workspace. Again, you only need to do this once, but so I need you to all do this with me. Now, if you choose not to use this workspace, that's fine. But I at least want you to make that workspace with me right now, and then you can decide later whether you want to use it or don't want to use it. Or again, if you're working on this machine right here and you want to build it here and then use it on your laptop at home, whatever, it's just, again, all you do is drop the file into the right place and you don't have to remake this space. Make sense? All right, I'm going to start the way most of you guys' space looks like. If you come up to the window menu in Photoshop, click on the drop down and come down, you will have options for workspaces. If you click Essential Workspace, it's the default workspace. If you simply click on that, yours may already be that way. This will actually take you back. This is how Photoshop actually ships this. However, there's no guarantee that you're really back at the default yet. You need to do a second move, and it's right back to the very same place we just were, the window menu, down to Workspace, and then you will notice that Reset takes on the name of whatever workspace we just picked. Because I just picked Essentials, this now says Reset Essentials. You need to reset the workspace. Now, you don't notice any real change in this, but depending on how the layout works, that can have an enormous impact on what you're doing and how it looks. So it's always two-step, change space and reset, change space and reset. We good on this? Okay, to do this really quickly, first you need to come up to the window menu and look down at the very bottom and make sure that you have application frame checked. What application frame does is that actually, you'll see here on my screen, it actually allows you, it anchors all of the tools and the palettes into this frame. Without that, these things all move independent of one another, and it can just lead to chaos. So if you have actually moved your screen down like this, you can see mine, this is no longer full screen right here. This will work on the majority of Macintosh computers, but not all of them. If you hover near the word Adobe Photoshop and double click really fast, it will fill your screen with the maximum it can fill it without losing anything. So it's just a great trick to get there big scale really quick. We're now going to modify things a little bit, and the first thing I'm going to do is come over to the two little icons that are sitting in the top right hand corner. The very top one is History. If you click on it, it will actually give you a flyout menu that's got a tab that says History. I want you to grab the tab that says History and tear the entire thing off. So I've now got History that's floating out here. I've got a comment panel that's still anchored to that. I want you to click the comment tab and also pull it away so that it sits in a window by itself. It's not anchored to the side anymore. And then click on the little X mark at the top, getting rid of comments. Nobody uses them. If you've got actions underneath it, tear the actions off and do the same thing. We're going to use it later, but if you've got actions still there as an icon, tear the action off and click on the little X to get rid of actions as well. Okay, next couple of things we're going to do really quickly. At the very top of your frame, and you've got to do it in this order, because the thing is that we could get rid of all of this stuff and then start adding what we want to add back, but it will not be anchored to the application frame. So the way that we're going about doing this will keep everything anchored to the application frame, which is ultimately what you want. So to start, I'm going to grab Swatches, the Swatches tab, and simply pull it out from that tab, from the panels that are on the very top, and click on the X to get rid of it. I'm going to grab Gradients and pull it out. Click on the X to get rid of them. I'm going to grab Pattern tab, pull it out. Click on the X to get rid of it. Then before we get rid of color, because we are going to get rid of color, first off, I want to put something in its place. Grab the Properties tab that's right underneath this, tear it out so that it's sitting out, so the tab is sitting out in the middle of our screen the way it is, the way mine is looking right now. And then grab the tab and you want to bring it on top of the palette that says Color. And you want to do it till you see this blue line go all the way around it. That's telling you you're in the place that you're going to drop this Property tab onto this upper palette. There's three palettes that we're looking at right here. There's the color one, the adjustment ones, and the layer one. So this, we're bringing this up, and we're going to simply let go of it up there. And you can see now it is a tab, but it's anchored to the frame, which is why we've gone to all of this trouble. Then grab the color tab and tear it out and click on the X to get rid of it. So we went through all of that to get the properties tab anchored up to the very top of our frame. That's part's important for us. If you don't have anything that I mentioned, click on the window drop down and come down and you actually pick it. Just put a check mark next to it and it will appear somewhere. So properties, actually, if you click on it, it should become visible, and then you can put it up in the top. You good? Yeah. Okay. Libraries we are going to keep. We don't use them tons, but it's not going to get in our way. But I want to put it up in the tabs along with properties. So grab the library tab, drag it up onto the top into the palette that is right next to, that is holding properties. When you get the blue line around it, let go. It is now libraries is actually anchored up in that top. And then click on properties, because when we save this workspace, whatever's visible in these tabs is what will always show up. And we want this to always show up. We want these guys to always be here. So the next thing that we're going to change is we are going to grab channels all the way down in this bottom part down here. Grab the channels tab and pull it out. And then, sorry, I'm going to grab the layers tab and I'm going to drag it up into adjustments. I don't know, I want to get rid of adjustments, but I'm worried that I'm going to that I'm going to break up this panel nesting of all three of these. So I'm going to grab layers and I'm going to drag it up into the adjustments panel. When I get the blue around the center panel right here, I'm going to let go. Then I'm going to bring paths up with it and let go. And then finally, I'm going to grab adjustments and pull it out. How many people are using this adjustments panel? Why? It's there. Again, space is at a premium in Photoshop. There is a menu at the very bottom of your layers panel that has every single one of these adjustments in it. Get rid of your adjustments panel. You'll never use it again. Click on layers to make sure that it is visible. Now, if you hover your cursor right between these two panels right now, so I've got the properties library at the top. I've got layers paths down at the bottom. I need a little bit more space for my layers because my layers can actually grow. It can get a lot of deep ones. Properties is basically shows you previews of your curves and that sort of thing, whatever. It doesn't get that bigger. It doesn't need that much room. So if you hover your cursor right between these two panels, you'll get a double-headed arrow. You can actually click and raise it up a little bit to give you a little bit more space for all your layers and not as much for the properties. And this is actually, this side of the image has actually been, of our workspace has been built pretty good. So our next move is to come up to the window menu, down to info. This is not something that a lot of people use. That is going to change today and will change for the whole rest of this semester. This thing can speed up your work and get you right where you need to go so much faster. So, but anyway, when info comes up, it's actually anchored on the right-hand side. That's not where I want it. So I'm going to click on the tab that says info, and I'm going to drag it over. And I'm coming all the way over to the tool tab, and you can see when I get over here, if you start to actually overlap the tool tab a little bit, you'll get this big blue line over here. This is now telling you it's going to be anchored to that tool tab as well, and simply let go. You'll notice now that the info tab occupies this entire side over here. We need to put history and channels into this left side, into the left side over here. And you would think you would try to scooch them under the bottom. You don't really do that, not with this. If you notice there's this divider line that's right here sort of in the middle of it, that's what we're really going to go for. So grab the history tab, drag it on top of this, and then bring it up till the part where it just starts to goose underneath the info palette, and you will get a solid blue line, and let go. When you do that, history will now occupy the entire bottom of this. Now we're going to add channels underneath this, and this way you actually do it the way I think it always should have been for this side. But grab the channels tab and bring it down underneath the bottom of the history tab. You'll get a solid blue line. Let go. And actually now you've got info with history underneath it and channels underneath that. Channels, we need to see more of it than we need to see history. So if you hover your cursor between the channels palette and the history palette, you get the double-headed arrow. You can click and drag up to give yourself more channels and less history. We're almost there. We got one last thing to add, and that is actions. So come over to your window menu, come down to actions. It will actually bring open the actions tab. It's also bringing open comments tab. I don't want comments, so I'm going to click comments and tear it off of actions and click on the X to get rid of it. And then the actions tab, I'm going to drag and park it into my history palette. So again, I've got it hovered over the history palette. I get a blue line all the way around it. I let go and it docks it with history. And then click on history because that's what we want visible more often than the actions palette. Yes?
I got lost after the channels because my I'm not sure, like.
Yeah, just drag it on the bottom. Keep going. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
Let go. You're there. I know, sometimes it's just that easy. Okay, so this is looking the way we want this ultimately to look. So we're going to save this workspace now. Come up to the window menu, down to workspace, and you can come down to new workspace, and you can give it a name. I've got so many of them. I'm up to retouching 29 right now, so I'm not going to save mine, but I would just call it retouching. It makes it really simple. And then simply hit save. I'm going to hit cancel out of mine because I've already got one. And then again, so is your all screen looking something like this? Yeah? Okay. To find where that workspace is, again, go back to our website. Go back to that preference location file. In the location file, as you start to scroll down, we're looking for workspaces. Well, never mind. She should just do a search for this, right? Okay, hang on. Workspace preferences. So in Photoshop, it is also in your user library, also in the preference folder, also in the Photoshop settings folder. That's right where we found that last preference setting. So I'm simply going to go right back to that. Again, Windows people go all the way down to find where yours is. But mine was in my library, in my preference folder, in Adobe Photoshop, let's see, workspace, versions. It's in the settings folder, so it's going to be Adobe Photoshop 2023 for me, settings. Click on that, and if you go down to the very bottom, you will see workspace folder and workspace modified folder. If you click on the modified, which is where I think it should be, you might find it, but in a lot of cases it's just in the workspace folder itself. The thing that you just saved should be there. Again, in my case, I'm going to do retouching 29. Grab that and drag it to your desktop. Again, don't let go, because otherwise it will remove it. Instead, over your desktop, hold down the Option key. You will get a little plus and let go. This will actually, in my case, I've already got one there, so I'm just going to say stop to that, but you would keep it there. Now, all you ever need to do is take this file and drop it in this folder on any machine in the world, and you will have this space built for you. You never have to do it again. Did that work for you guys? And the thing is, it's dynamic. So if you take this, you built this on a little bitty laptop, and you take it home and you put it on your giant-ass 32-inch monitor, it scales up automatically. It will fit perfectly. It's crazy. Yes?
I just want to make sure that you just said go to workspace and then take that, add it back to
you need to put this right back into this very same folder on a different machine. So again, that path is important, but if you put it back in there, you'll be good to go. Yes?
So I had it the first time,
Mhm.
and I go into library and preferences,
Right?
but now it's not showing me any of my Adobe folders.
Okay, I'm not sure that really is. That's maybe a different library. This
Okay.
is, I think, your system library. So let's try this again. Go to the Go menu and hold down the Shift key or the Option key. Yeah.
Is
Yep.
that working?
Yeah, and yeah, that was it. And that's this library.
Okay.
And now try that and see.
Okay.
Yeah, and there's
there.
Adobe, and there's, yeah, and your settings are now actually they're separate. So are you in 2021?
I am.
Okay, no, that's fine, that's fine, that's fine. But that's where they're going to be.
Okay.
But if you're in an older version of Adobe, these things actually work for newer versions of Adobe. So when you update, typically it's automatically updated. Every time I update a copy of Photoshop, my spaces are already updated. But if that's not the case, this thing works forward and backward for as many versions of Photoshop as I can remember. Yes?
I don't see the retouching in the workspaces. It's just the.
Yeah, because you're in the wrong library. So that's okay.
Okay.
Go back to Finder, click on the Go menu, hold down the Option key, come down to that library, and now pick Preferences. Yep. And then which version are you in? You're in 2023, so you're clicking on those settings. And then down at the bottom, Workspaces. Try the top one. It's usually the regular, that guy. No, that's just an untitled one, so try Modified. Did you save it?
Yeah, I believe so.
Well, let's go back really quick into Photoshop because we can save it right now. And again, just come up to Window, down to Workspace, down to New Workspace. Oh, you named yours Untitled.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead and hit Cancel Out.
Okay.
Go back into the Finder,
And then press that one.
and that one, and that's the space. That's your custom space.
Okay, so then I drag it.
Just to your desktop or anywhere you put it on an external hard drive anywhere. Okay. So I know at this stage of the game, you guys, yes?
Is that normal if I have exactly the same folders?
I'm sorry, it's what?
See, they're the same.
Oh, yeah. If they've got too many in there, I wouldn't necessarily worry about that. But again, is it in either one of those modified spaces?
Yeah.
Okay.
On it.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Let's actually do something. How about we work on an image? Okay. Not great shakes, but we're going to try a little experiment here. This is my how to get you guys to really believe in color theory. How's that? I know, exciting, right? Okay, I know, right? So I need everybody to go to that assignment folder that you downloaded. Click on it. Go to your session class number 1 files. I'm going to do this off of yours. And you should see a little thing in here that says redcar.psd. Can everybody find that? So again, I'm in my student files, week 1. It's called redcar.psd. It's a picture of a Corvette. Double click it, and you should open it up into Photoshop. Are we good on this? Who has not got this open? We're all good? Okay, another great little trick about having this workspace set up like this. If you come over to the toolbar, you'll see sort of down in the bottom third of it, there's a hand and a magnifying glass. If you double click on the magnifying glass, it makes the image 100%. You can see this image is now scaled to 100%, as big as this could actually be. Well, it's scaled at 100%. If you double click on the hand, the car will expand to be the biggest it can be, but not go under any of your palettes. So this gives you the maximum amount of workspace that you can actually have in here, and it's just a really quick shortcut. It's another advantage of having this bookended the way we've got this bookended. Sometimes if you don't do it this way, you're actually, the image itself can actually go underneath palettes. So if I'm into here, it just ends up being a mess. So no matter where you are in this, double clicking on the hand will load this back as big as this can possibly be. Okay. For all you 1s, 1.5 and 2 people, no pressure. For you 3.5 people, pressure's on now. I'm going to whip out my timer here. I'm going to give you 2 minutes. Hang on one second, let me get it set up. I'm going to give you 2 minutes to turn this car green. Go. Double click on the hand really quick. That's it. I'd turn the car green. But I'm encouraged that you know what a mask is. That seems more than a 1 to me. One minute's up. Fifteen seconds left. Perfect, we're done. So, I'm seeing a lot of green cars. I'm seeing a lot of red cars too, and if that's the case, don't worry about it. That's why you're in this class, is to learn how to do this shit. So, it looks like, and I'm going to go on a limb here to say most of you guys did it with a hue saturation curve. Is that correct? Right, so this is what I think most people did. Remember I told you didn't need that whole adjustment panel in the middle? If you look at the bottom of the layers palette, there is a icon that looks like a circle that's half black and half white. If you click on that, you will get a fly-up menu. This is all of your adjustment layers are right here. Why would you have that shit in 2 places? Why would you have adjustments panel taking up valuable space for you? No reason. They're all right here. So I'm going to pick my hue saturation layer. And if you're just doing it down and dirty, you can actually click on this and start to drag this to change the hue of the car. And you can sort of get it green like that. There's a lot of contamination here. It works, blah, 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 blah. If you're actually better at that than what I just did, I'm going to zero this out again. You could have gotten the targeting adjustment tool and actually picked the red color, clicked on the plus eyedropper and picked even more of the red color, and then done the same trick and actually shift that. It leaves everybody else pretty much alone, and that's a pretty, it's a pretty good trick. It gets there sort of as well. One way of doing it. However, I'm going to show you another. And I want somebody to time me. So when somebody's got a timer ready, shout go.
Go.
All right. Sorry. Can't see my whole. Stop.
20 seconds.
And if I'd had my panel showing, it'd have been 15. How did I do that? Color theory. So I get this all the time. People go, wow, that's pretty insane, right? So I'm going to show you how I did this. It's going to be confusing to most of you, which is why we're going to spend a good part of the rest of our day here actually talking about color theory and why things work the way they actually work. But I get this all the time. People are like, how did you do that? How did you do that? How did you do that? So I'm going to show you how I did it and the way it happened. If you look back over in your history palette right now, you all can do this. If you scroll to the top of your history palette and click on, there's a little icon with the car sitting right up there. You can simply click on that and that'll actually take you back to the way the image started in the beginning. That's how we just opened up. Make sense? Couple of things I want to change while we're here really quickly, as long as we're here. In the history panel, there's a menu to the right of it. If you click on that menu, you'll get a flyout menu, and you have history options. We want to set these options. So click on the history options, and in the dialog that opens up, automatically create first snapshot is checked by default. But automatically create new snapshot when saving is not. You want to enable that. And then you also want to put a check mark by the show new snapshot dialog by default and say OK. The next thing you want to do is come down to your channels palette. Again, go to the little menu that's all the way on the far right hand side of that. Click on that and come down to panel options. You want to click a radio button next to the largest of the thumbnails and say OK. You cannot believe how much information you can get from these little thumbnails if they were big enough to see. Come over to your layers palette, click on the little three menu items on the far right hand side, click on the drop down menu, come down to panel options, and also click on the thumbnail, the radio button by the largest thumbnail, and say OK. And then finally click on the path palette, click on the menu to the right, come down to panel options, and also put the radio button next to the largest of your icons. The reason we do this is that, again, you can see an amazing amount of detail in those things if they are big enough. So if we take a look at your channels palette right now, you will see that there is an RGB value that's at the very top. It's a composite. But if you click on the red, you'll see a black and white. This is a mask that is controlling how much red this image contains. So if you think about a mask, how many people in here are not really comfortable with masking? Okay, so in a mask, in the simplest version of a mask, what they would say is that black conceals, white reveals. That's how they phrase it. But then every shade in between allows a certain amount of transparency. So it's not just black and white. If you have a middle gray, it will allow 50% of what's coming through that mask. That's basically it. So when we say that this is a mask, if you imagine taking this as a filter and putting it in front of a really, really bright red light, a projector, where it's light in here is going to let a lot of red light in. Where it's dark in here is not going to let any red light in at all. Right? So that's just a way it controls how much red is in the image. If you click on the green, it does, this controls now how much green is in the image. And you can see that it's really dark. The body of the car is really dark. That's because green is the opposite of red. There's very little green in this because it's a red car. By the same token, if you look back here into the trees in the back in here, you'll pick up more of the green back here. It's much lighter because it's green, and they're like the grass is really light back here because it's letting a lot of green light into that. Does that sort of make sense? And then blue is the same thing. So what I did was I actually changed this to a completely different color system called LAB. In LAB, we do not have this sort of setup like this. The problem that you've got with an RGB system like this is that when you change the color of this using a curve, you don't just change the color, you also change the tone. In LAB, they separate luminosity from color, and it allows you to control them independent of each other. So to do it, come up to the image menu, down to mode, and we are going to change this from an RGB color mode to an LAB color mode. So again, look up at my screen really quick. You'll see where I am and what I'm doing. And say OK to that. Now look what has happened to your channels. Your channels no longer have a red, green, and blue. What they've got is lightness A and B. If you click on the lightness, you can see it's the black and white version of your car. It's all the luminosity of the information of this car is sitting in here. But click on the A channel. This is your color information. The A channel is one axis. The A channel goes from green to magenta or green to red. We'll look at that in a second in the color wheel. And then B is your blue-yellow axis. So what I've done is, if I go back to my LAB version of it, I'm going to add a curve to this. So come over to your Layers palette. Click on the icon at the very bottom. That's the circle, half black and half white. You'll get a flyout menu, and you can add a curve to this. In the curve, in the Properties panel, you can see by default, it defaults to the luminosity channel called lightness. But if you click down and you come down to the A channel, the A, and again, LAB, is the green-red axis. We're simply going to invert the axis. So grab the point that is at the very bottom, drag it all the way up, grab the point that would be the white point in a normal curve and drag it all the way down. I've inverted the color. Everything that was red is now green. Everything that was green is now red. It hasn't affected the luminosity at all because the luminosity is separate from this. This is just color. Okay, with that in mind, I'm going to close this up. You do not need to save this. It isn't part of your homework. However, we get into...
If you have something red in the background, it also changes.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So again, you would mask it. You can control it. I mean, you know, but to get that precise color correction that fast, are you kidding me? Okay. How black can you get on a screen? How black is black? Anyone? Well, I'll show you. Can everybody see this monitor up here in the corner? You guys all see this guy? If you can't, work your way around so that you can see it. It's turned on, ugly little picture on here. Well, not really ugly little picture, but nonetheless. This reminds me of another thing. How many of you guys have a cute picture of your cat or your dog as your desktop? You got to worry about all the shit. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself. So how black is black? This screen cannot get any blacker. Or can it? What do you see? Sure you do, right? Can this screen get any blacker? Everybody look at that screen and you tell me if it changes. Is it darker? Radically darker. What controls the black level when you are retouching of your image? Not just retouching, when you're doing anything. Environment. You guys are all retouching in rooms that are way too fucking bright. This is too bright right now. How bright should it actually be? You want to be able to navigate the furniture. You don't want to trip over shit. You need to be able to see the table and that kind of stuff, right? If we actually lost the projector here, this room would probably be a really good sort of like retouching space, right? But how many of you guys start retouching in a room with bright daylight coming in and you just keep soldiering on for another 8 hours and you finish up at 10 o'clock at night and there's not a light on in the room? Any of you? Come on, I used to retouch just like you guys. I know that's exactly how you do this shit. You want to see outside, you want to see the lake, you want to see it snowing, you care about all of that. You started out with one black level in your image, and it's changed to another black level in your image over the course of the day. You didn't do a damn thing to the image, but the black level of that image has changed radically. And you expect to be able to then reproduce that legitimately? You've got a black that's jumping all over the place. Does this make sense? You've got to lock your retouching down. It's got to be a room, when I go into retouching, all my windows get blacked out, not covered, blacked out. You can get blackout material at Joann Fabrics, put little magnets on it, put little push pins on it over your windows. You have got to get into a space, though, that is repeatable, dependable, not changeable. You've got to eliminate that variable. What do you wear when you retouch? Black? You're not wearing it now. Well, you are. You and I are a kindred spirit, I can tell. Nobody has seen me. There was only one class I do. When I used to teach assisting retouching. When I shoot outside and it's really hot, I wear a white t-shirt, but it is the only time you will ever see me in anything other than a black t-shirt. Yeah, I would love to say it's because I retouch. But green sweatshirt, you know, it's beautiful. I love that. But what does that do? You saw it earlier. You said, what was in that screen? Didn't somebody say, oh, there are reflections in there. That's what's in there. Well, what happens when you wear a red sweatshirt and it's reflecting red in your image? Do you know that? So you put a red wash over your image, you go in with curves and you color correct that red to get it out. It's not in the image, it's in your fucking screen because you're wearing a red sweatshirt. Your room walls, what color are your room walls? These are this. This now is kicking this puke color into my screen, and if I start retouching this, this is dominated by yellow. So I start pumping blue in there to get rid of this yellow. It's not in my image, it's in the fucking wall. Right? So you've got to take control of your environment if you're going to be serious about doing this kind of work. How many of you guys do test strips when you print? Oh, admit it. The rest of you don't print then, right? I haven't done a test strip in 20 years. I don't need to. The only time I pull a test print is to see where I've really screwed up in my retouching or my compositing work. I'm going to pick up an edge that I missed. It isn't about color. Are we good on this part? Okay, we're going to get to what controls white level later, because we've got to start with part of this first. And we'll wind this up, guys. We got about 25 minutes left in this, so I would love to give you a break right now, but we got to get through this. So stay with me. Okay, I need everybody to open up their version of Photoshop. Just make sure that you got it open because we're going to work in Photoshop really quickly. I'm going to go back and forth between these. So RGB and CMYK, tri-stimulus descriptions of color. Do not let this word throw you. Do not let it get you nervous. RGB was developed based on human eyes. All the systems that we use for color photography is all based on how human vision works. You've got 3 sets of cells in your eyes. You've actually got a couple different ones as well, but the ones that mainly deal with color, you've got 3 of them. One is sensitive to red, one is sensitive to green, and one is sensitive to blue. And if you mix those together, you can actually end up with any possible color. So when we talk about RGB, we also talk about CMY. Now, CMYK is what we usually refer to. K has to do with the fact that CMY is an imperfect color system. I'll talk to you about why that is in just a second. But you can think of it, CMY is basically the opposite of RGB. So I was hoping we would get those backlights on because this is washing this screen out really bad. So hang on one second. Okay. So this is how they figured the whole thing out. If you imagine what you're looking at here, this illustration, there's an observer right here, and there's a screen right here that's keeping him from being able to see anything but through this little slit. Does that make sense, what this illustration is? And then the other side of this little slit, there is a shelf that goes right here. Underneath the shelf is a purple, lilac, lavendery kind of light that's actually shining underneath here. None of this light, though, can get above the shelf, so it's protecting it. So this pure color on the bottom here. On the top end, up here, you've got a red light, a green light, and red light, green light, and a blue light. And they're all shining on this spot right here, and they're connected to rheostats, which allows you to make more red, less red, more green, less green, more blue, less blue. Does that make sense what's going on here? And you can see that what the person is seeing right now, the two colors are different. However, if you adjust the RGB amounts perfectly, you can match any other color that there is. Does this make sense? So, additive primaries. Red, green, and blue are the primaries in an additive system. Cyan, magenta, and yellow are the secondaries. So you can see here, this is three lights that are overlapping each other. There's a green light here, a blue light here, and a red light here. Where the red and the green overlap, you get yellow. Where the green and the blue overlap, you get cyan. And where the blue and the red overlap, you get magenta. Where all three overlap, you get a neutral gray. And if it's at its maximum brightness, you have white. If it's at its mid brightness, you have a middle gray. And if it's at its least or no brightness, you have black. But it's always a neutral gray here. Make sense? It is emissive. You think of a monitor. This is why they call it additive. You start with a monitor that is black. You start to add energy. If you add equal amounts of RGB at its maximum intensity, that will be white. Additive system. Make sense? You start with black, no light. You add equal amounts of RGB to get to any color, equal amounts, and this is a critical one for us. This is how we color balance. How many of you, when you color balance in Lightroom, use the little white color balance eyedropper thing? Do you guys use that? One of you? Only one person white balances their fucking image? And how do you do it? What do? You search for a neutral color, you click on it. What the tool does is it takes whatever that color is and it makes it equal amounts of red, green, and blue. By definition, that is a colored balanced image. All based on this. It does not work in CMYK because CMYK, the pigments on there are impure and you never have equal values of this. So you really don't know. There's really no way to color balance, truly color balance in CMYK. So how black is black? We've already looked at it. Subtractive primaries. Cyan, magenta, yellow are the primaries in a subtractive system. Red, green, and blue are the secondaries. So we think of these as ink. Why? Why is this legal pad yellow? What's happening? It is reflecting yellow, but that's not the only thing it's doing. What else is it doing? It's absorbing all the other colors. White lights, this isn't really a white light, but nonetheless, basically white lights, contain every color in the spectrum. The dye that's in this piece of paper is absorbing all the colors in the rainbow, all the magentas, the blues, the cyans, the green. It's absorbing all of those. The one thing it's not absorbing is, though, yellow. That color is being reflected back to you, and that's why you see yellow. That is a subtractive system. That's how inks work. So in this case, we've got cyan, magenta, and yellow are our inks. That's what they have in those printers out there. If you mix yellow and cyan ink, you get green. If you mix cyan and magenta ink, you get blue. If you mix magenta and yellow, you get red. If you mix all three together at their maximum intensity, theoretically, you get black. but because they've never been able to come up with pigments, pure enough pigments in ink to ever achieve this ideal. This is theoretical. This is not the reality. The reality is that once you reach a certain point, these inks lose their efficiency and their ability to absorb color. So what they do, the trick that they do, is they start to remove equal amounts of this ink and they replace this with a black ink. They introduce K, which is a black ink. That's why you always hear CMYK. That's why in those printers out there, the printers that you guys have used, you change ink cartridges, but you've always got a black cartridge that goes in there. It's to make up for this. You don't have that equivalent in RGB.
How do they get the K?
How do they what?
Get the K, the black ink.
What do you mean, how do they get it?
They need to mix something, right?
Oh no, they actually put in a black ink.
Oh, okay.
They start subtracting. You'll see in just a second. You'll see, it makes it easier to see it. This works by absorbing ink. Light color is absorbed by ink. So whatever ink the color is, so again, a magenta ink, it's absorbing all the other colors except for magenta, and it's actually reflecting magenta. But when I start to mix it with these other colors, I can achieve any color in between. Right? You start with white. You subtract amounts of RGB to get any color that you want. Pure CMYK pigments do not exist. Equal amounts of CMYK do not equal gray. Black is equal to the CMYK at its maximum intensity. That's why we actually need a black ink. But in this system, how white is white? We've already talked about in the additive system how black is black. In this system, how white is white? You will learn the evil trick questions that I ask all the time in this class. It's the piece of paper. Have I already lost every one of you? How white is white? The fucking white piece of paper. It doesn't get any whiter. Yeah. I don't blame you. I blame all the teachers before me. Did I just say that? I used to say, okay, this is a true story. I used to never, clearly you know by now my language can be floral. And I used to tell everybody, I was like, you cannot record my classes, because I was always terrified that somebody was going to walk into the, the provost office or whatever and say, listen to this. And I would lose my job. Now I record them and put them up on my YouTube channel. I don't know what I'm thinking. I really don't. I don't know when that change happened. It was just like, have you thought this through? Oh, well. The color wheel. It's a standard model. You guys probably, how many of you guys made one of these in the 6th grade? We all did, right? It's what got you into art, I'm certain. But nonetheless, it's a little different in the color when we talk about light, because the truth of it is, RGB that we talk about is not in light is actually, these would be considered pure colors. They modified, the truth of it is when they talk about red, green, and blue and mixing pigments, what they're really mixing is cyan, magenta, and yellow. It's just a misnaming of those colors, but that's what really is going on. So the true RGB exists in a world of light. By definition, red is always at 3 o'clock. If you imagine this is a clock face, it's always at 3 o'clock. It's listed also at 0 degrees. How many degrees in a circle? 360. So that's basically how they label what hue you're actually talking about. So in the system that they did for the color wheel, they took RGB and they put them on the color wheel so that they would be as far from each other as they could possibly be. So you get a third of the way up here, 120 degrees. Again, 360 divided by 3 is 120. This is not a math class, don't worry. If you go in the opposite direction to get to blue, it's a negative 120 degrees, or it's a positive 240 degrees, however, whatever. This is how you get to blue. Red, by definition, is always here, and it's always set at 0. The other thing to notice about the color wheel, though, is that the complementary colors of each primary color are the secondary colors, and they are exactly opposite to the primary color. The opposite of red is cyan. You mix cyan into red to lessen its saturation. If you mix them in perfectly equal proportions, you end up in the middle right here as a neutral gray. This is true of all the primaries, all the secondaries, and anything that's in between them. So the opposite of yellow is blue, the opposite of green is magenta. Those things all matter to us. So when we do color correction, if it's too red, we add cyan. We don't add blue, we add cyan. Make sense about this? What's missing from this? It's not just black, it's white as well. What's missing from this we would consider to be brightness. Luminosity, depends on what you're basically talking about. But brightness is missing from this because this is a two-dimensional model. To get brightness, you need a three-dimensional model. Make sense? We've got these color axes. So we'll talk about how this ultimately ends up being. So hang in there. So we've already gone through what each of those are. Oh, something to notice here because this does matter to us. As you start to add a complementary color, you bring it into the center. If you add the perfect same amount, whatever, you get a neutral gray. However, what's important to notice is that by definition then, that means the most saturated colors are out here on the very edge. This is the most saturated red I can get is right here. This red right here is not as saturated. And this matters to us when we start to do mapping colors into, the perfect example is when you go from screen to print. You lose saturation. You will never get a print to be as vibrant as a screen can be. What happens is that these colors all start to get pulled here towards the center. That becomes the fight that we have. Make sense? I need everybody to open up Photoshop really quickly. I'm going to join you. In Photoshop, if you look down at the very bottom of the tool palette, there is a white patch and a black patch. They're foreground and background colors. If you simply click on the white patch, it'll open up the color picker. And when the color picker is actually opened up, you will notice there are 4 sets of color descriptions right here. In my case, I've got white on here. Whatever color you guys had open, it doesn't really matter. We're going to change it in just a second. But the first grouping up here at the top, HSB, stands for hue, saturation, and brightness. It's the HSB correction that most of you guys tried to use to get the car green. The one underneath it is RGB, red, green, and blue. That's sort of the standard that Photoshop actually works in. On the top right-hand side, you have LAB. This is not called lab any more than RGB is called Rugub. If you say, oh, you know, the lab color space, people will know you're a rookie. If you say LAB, they'll bow down to you as the professional that you are and pay you what you're really worth, or closer anyway. And then finally, CMYK is sitting down here at the bottom. So we're going to put in solid color. I'm going to actually ask you to select red. And regardless of what you have in there, type in 255. Hit the tab key and go to green and put in 0. Tab key and go to the blue and put in 0 as well. So I've created a solid red color because I've got this red at 255. So what I want to show everybody, I want you to click on the radio button that's right next to the R. Whatever radio button you click is what this column becomes on the side. And you can see that in the column now on the side that we start at the bottom, it's black and it goes all the way up to a pure red. If you grab those little arrows and drag them down, you will notice that the R value is starting to drop, and if we get all the way down to the bottom, we have 0. So you can see the scale of possible pure reds that we have goes from 0 up to 255 in the R channel alone. That is the range we work for. It's actually 256 possible reds. Why do we have 256 when it only goes up to 255? Because 0 is a legitimate value. When we go down to 0, this is not just a black, this is a black-red. Photoshop treats this as actually a color. So, but does this make sense, that range of 0 to 255? Are we good on that part? This is true for what we call an 8-bit image. Without getting into bit depth and talking all about that, It is the available possible reds that we have in this image. You have the very same scale for green. If you click on the green radio button and simply just click on it, I've zeroed out my red, so I've got 0, 0, 0, which is black by definition. I'm going to drag my green and go all the way up to the top, and you'll see I get a 255 green or anything that's in between. 128 is considered mid, so if you come here to 128, this would be a middle green. That's if you look at the new color that's up here at the top, that's the resulting color of whatever you're doing in this space, so that's basically what you're given. If we crank this all the way up to the top, then I'm actually going to grab the blue, and I'm going to, again, the blue now will be in what this column is. I'm going to drag it all the way to the top, and I end up with cyan. The reason I've got cyan now is I have mixed blue, 100% blue, and 100% green together, and I end up with 100% cyan. Does that make sense? Remember our additive color system where we were adding those two colors and that's what we ended up achieving? Right? Questions about this? Check this out. Go back to your red, type in 255, tab key 0, tab key 0, back to our red. Remember we were talking about our color wheel and I said hue is always at 0 degrees? It's sitting right here at 0 degrees. Remember we said that cyan was the exact opposite of red. So the exact opposite, if a color wheel is 360 degrees, the exact opposite would be half of that. Type in 180. And you have pure cyan, by definition. Are we good on this? Okay. Stay here, we're going to come back to it. Oh, one thing I did want to show you here. Let's go back. Let me go back with you really quick. So in the color picker, when this is actually opened up here, we'll actually say that I'm going to leave it here as the, let's not make it a pure cyan. Let's make this a much darker color. So let's do this. So click on your red again and type in 128. Hit tab key 128. Tab key 128. We're going to make a middle gray. And you can see what is now beginning to happen here. If we actually click the radio button next to brightness, we can actually control the brightness again of this. And you'll see my numbers will actually, all three of them will go down if I start to pull this down. But what I wanted to point out here is that look at what's happening here in the CMYK chart part of all of this. You'll notice that this stage of the game, I've got 51% cyan, 43% magenta, 43% yellow, and 7% black ink. That's what they need to mix together to give me a middle gray. If you click on the radio button next to brightness and make the column a brightness slider, push this up to the top into a lighter gray. And you will see that in the lighter grays here, the black ink doesn't play a role at all. It's just mixes of CMYK. But they're completely, there's nothing even about them. The actual formulas to generate how much cyan you need, cyan's the biggest culprit in all of this. It's the hardest one that they've never found what really is a legitimate pigment for cyan. So it becomes, it's the weird one. The magenta and yellow are usually close to one another, but they're not exact. This thing, to calculate this, took color scientists decades to figure this shit out. It's really, 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 really challenging. But look what happens if you drag your color down now and you start to make it dark, pull it into the 3/4 tones. You can see that the K is starting to become a real dominant player in here. The RGB, the CMYK values, they've done everything that they can do, but they simply cannot do the work. They cannot do the heavy lifting to get to black. So you've got to introduce this black ink. And if you crank it all the way down to the bottom, you can see that they've pushed the CMYK as much as they can, but 90% of this is a black ink. This is a nightmare to try to color correct in, whereas the RGB and HSB and LAB worlds are much, much, much easier to color correct in because you don't have this problem. Are we good? Hang in there, guys. We got 5 minutes. Wait, we don't have 5 minutes. We've got it. Okay. So we are going to stop here. We will pick up this again as we go.